Hello. Well, moving on to chapter 13. Chapter 13 deals with heroines. So we're going to get two chapters, 13 and 15, that deal with heroines. 13 dovetails well with chapter 12. Chapter 12 dealt with Odysseus. Chapter 13 primarily deals with Penelope. So, Penelope as a heroine. She is, first of all, a successful heroine. So things turn out well for her. She has some say in their turning out well for her. I mean, she is not a passive heroine. As a heroine, she is associated with home. She is the thing that Odysseus is trying to get to, right? So she is the thing he's questing for, but she has her own value sort of on her own. The adjectives that Homer uses of Penelope are careful and circumspect, which really fit her. So Odysseus his adjectives are tricky, clever, of many turns, slippery sort of guy. So it makes sense that his wife be someone who's careful and circumspect. She's not going to jump into things. She's going to be careful about how she approaches them. The selections come from Odyssey, Book 19 and Book 23. In 19, Odysseus and Penelope have a conversation. He is in disguise. She may or may not know that it is Odysseus. In Book 23, she presumably knows it is Odysseus, but she puts him through one more test just to make sure. So these are sort of a good selections for the chapter on Penelope. There were two other heroines, Alcestis and Helen, but I did want to talk a little bit about Helen as a heroine. Some people would not see her as such, but she is remember, heroines, like heroes, they're known for doing something remarkable, and Helen's beauty is such that she is the most beautiful woman in the world. She's the reason for the Trojan War, according to the myth, so she does do something sort of exceptional. She is presented as a heroine, more like what we would consider a heroine, or more Penelope-like, in a play by Euripides called The Helen, which we have. And the premise of that is that the real Helen didn't go to Troy, that the gods used Helen as a pretext for Troy, but what they did is they replaced Helen with a sort of phantom Helen, or like a doppelganger that went with Paris. So you still have the reason for the Trojan War, but the real Helen ended up actually in Egypt, where she has been stuck for the entire time. And this is a rescue play. Menelaus lands in Egypt. He's likely to get in trouble in Egypt, and it takes really Helen's smarts to get them out of the trouble and get them safely on their way home. Helen in Homer is an ambiguous figure. She clearly went away willingly with Paris. She clearly has feelings for Paris. She also feels guilty about the fact that she left her husband. I don't know that she ever talks about Menelaus with love. In the Odyssey, they appear to be a happy couple, but it's also said that one of the things that Helen has is she has a collection of drugs, like mind-altering drugs that make you feel good. And so it is quite possible that she keeps Menelaus happy with her after the whole Trojan War thing by giving him drugs, which make everything happy, happy time. So he's happy with his wife. At any rate, she is sort of an ambiguous figure for Homer, but she still qualifies as a heroine because of her exceptional qualities. The scholarship for chapter 13 looks at a paradigm for the heroine, and it specifically looks at, this is an article by Lee Edwards, it's a selection from a book by Lee Edwards, which examines Psyche as a heroine figure. Now, Psyche is a character in a story from a Roman author named Apuleius. Apuleius wrote a sort of a novel called The Golden Ass about this guy. He gets transformed into a donkey because he happens to witness a witching ceremony, and the witches turn him into a donkey. and he spends the rest of the book in donkey form till the very final chapter. And while he's in donkey form, he's in a barn, and an old woman is telling a younger woman the story of Cupid and Psyche. And Psyche's really beautiful. She's compared to Aphrodite. Aphrodite doesn't want to have anything to do with this because she's, no one's as good looking as me. It's Venus in the Latin author. So Venus then has Cupid, her son. She wants him to shoot her with an arrow so that she falls madly in love with a pig or some wild animal. And, when everyone sees her having sex with an animal, of course, her whole reputation will be blown. Instead, when he gets ready to shoot the arrow at her, he's so amazed at her beauty that he drops the arrow. The arrow hits him in the foot, and he falls madly in love with Psyche. He can't tell mom about that. So what he does instead is he uses the winds and everything else to whisk her away to this sort of castle. And in the castle, everything's dark. And he comes to her in the darkness, and they make love, and they become sort of a couple. But she never actually sees what he looks like, because this way, she can't go around saying, "Well, my lover is Cupid," which then would get back to Venus, and Venus would be really upset now. And so what ends up happening is she does catch sight of him, and then he flees away. And then she spends the rest of the story trying to get him back. So this is a romance story. Right? Boy meets girl, boy and girl sort of split up, something happens, and then boy and girl, or just girl, spend the rest of the time trying to get back together. Right? So that's the setup. And so she's a romantic heroine. The thing about Edward's description is that Psyche as a heroine, her strength is not based on physical force. She's not like the mighty Hercules, but it's based on this sense of love and connection. Which some people would say would be what you would expect in a heroine figure, as opposed to the male hero figure who's going to be knocking heads. The comparison section looks at a piece from Ovid's Heroides. Ovid wrote a book called the Heroides, the Heroines, which are ostensibly letters from heroines to their heroes. So Medea writing to Jason, and Penelope writing to Odysseus. So this is a slight difference, in the way of looking at things. This is what was going through Penelope's head when she was basically stuck in Ithaca for 20 years without Odysseus, right? So she's married to him, but she basically doesn't see him for 20 years. And one might say, well, during the time of the Trojan War, that's one thing that lasted 10 years, but then it's even more time. So, what sort of thing is going through her mind? Because, of course, let's face it, you don't have to be, a heroine to realize that there's going to be some temptation when you've got suitors who are coming after you, and your husband you haven't seen in 20 years, right? That would take a lot of faith. The update, or the Nachleben section, deals with Penelope as modern authors see her. There's a discussion of Joanne Krieger's The Tapestry and the Web. Tapestry refers to this tapestry that Penelope makes as a trick for the suitors to keep them at bay. But web also indicates connection. It could also indicate like a spider's web is sort of a trap. So there's lots of stuff going on there. Louise Gluck wrote a work called Meadowlands, and Margaret Atwood wrote, in effect, an odyssey for Penelope called the Penelopiad, which is sort of like the epic is about her. So, because we don't get her story over that 20-year period. What we do is we get some flashbacks to stuff that she did 3 or 4 years before the narrative time of the Odyssey story, which is in that like month or so before Odysseus gets home, and then when he gets home. but we get flashbacks to some previous things, where someone refers to something that happened 3 or 4 years prior, but we don't have that whole story. So Margaret Atwood, who wrote The Handmaid's Tale, is a feminist author, and she then is going to use this as a way to look at Penelope, the woman at home, and her special type of heroism, which is going to be different than the hero. Right? The hero's on the move, the heroine is at home. And this, during World War II, right, the men went away to war, the women stayed at home, right, kept the home fires burning, right, that sort of thing. And, it's easy to talk about the heroes fighting elsewhere, but it's also tough just to stay home and do what you can to keep your spirits up and keep things together as best you can now without the person who you thought you could depend on because they're off at war, and you have to make it on your own. So I have not read the Penelope yet. I'm hoping to read it at some point, but my guess is a lot of the sentiment is something along those lines. It's just as tough to stay home as it is to go out and have the adventure.